Perfect. Okay, so I'm going to call this meeting to order. It is 7:04, and this is our committee of the whole meeting for September 10th. Just so a reminder for you folks online that the meetings are recorded for public viewing later. And to acknowledge that we are on the unceded First Nations land of Ehatasat Chinnikit territory. So if someone could approve the agenda, it's just us three this evening, and Kevin Brooks is here as well to do a presentation, and the CAO.
I move
to approve the agenda.
I love it. Another time. Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thanks for that. Any errors, deletions, additions, anything like that? CAO, council. Hearing none. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that's carried. Do you want to do these all together, or would you like to do them separately?
It's up to you.
Okay, at council's discretion, adoption of the minutes, either all together or in seriatim.
All together now.
I'll take that as a motion, Councillor Deck, to approve adopt the minutes. And a second from Councillor Denise. Anything that anybody wanted to, is there errors, omissions, deletions? Anything we got wrong? Any follow-up?
Nothing.
Nothing.
Not seeing anything either, so I'll call the question on that. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
So that's carried. That was the minutes from March 12th.
2 meetings.
March 12th and June 11th. Thanks. All right, so the business arising from the minutes is item 5.1, the Village of Zeballos draft zoning bylaw. I am going to hand that over to the CAO and he can disperse as he sees.
Thank you. So we do have Kevin Brooks from Maquinna. He's a planner who has put together this draft zoning bylaw. However, there is some feedback that we're requesting from council in the form of is everything that's in there captured the way that council sees it based on the public input and what you foresee happening for the community as far as zoning, and some clarification on what short-term vacation rentals should look like in the Village of Zeballos moving forward. So there is after the zoning bylaw, there is sort of a checklist of questions that can or cannot be answered up to council, and Kevin is here to answer any burning questions that you might have about this particular bylaw or zoning in general.
Amazing. Thank you for doing that so succinctly. I'm wondering before we start, Kevin, if you had anything to add to that before I turn it over to council for questions and comments.
Yeah, certainly. Thank you, Mayor. One of the sort of guiding principles when looking at developing a new bylaw like this for a community like Zeballos, one of the things that we've kept in mind through our conversations with yourselves, with the CAO, and with the village themselves is trying to create a bylaw that meets the requirements of the province under the new Bill 44 legislation, of course, but also isn't administratively burdensome. And so, we can make things as complicated or as simple as possible. And we've tried to thread the needle to create something that is going to be useful for the village, be able to be administered by the village. So it's not going to create a massive burden on the staff and council, but also meet the fundamental needs for a first bylaw, right? Because this really is a first zoning bylaw for the village. And so I just wanted to provide that premise of sort of that needle that we're trying to thread by providing something that's useful and effective, but still meet the requirements of the provincial legislative requirements.
Perfect. Thank you for that. I see that Councillor Deck has a question, so through to Councillor Deck.
Thank you. Your worship. I've read this over a couple times, Kevin, and I think you've done exactly what I would like to have done. It's comprehensive, but it's not heavy-handed by any means. And I really think this is doable for the staff and the village. So I give it 2 thumbs up. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Councillor Jack.
I think I have a one question. I also think it's quite concentrated, and I like that. It's pretty simple in itself. Of course, we'll have to work with it and see what arises from what we're going to put forward. I think there's going to be a lot of challenges because we've never had one, right? So, I mean, we're going to have a big steep learning curve here, and constituents, business owners, like I think there's going to be a lot of questions and a lot of trial and error how it's going to be governed. I think vacation rentals are becoming quite popular. Not just here, but here definitely. And I know we're going to issue. We're going to need to have a business license for vacation rentals. Are these vacation rentals going to have to prove how they're operating in any way to get that license? Like, are they going to have to prove they have insurance? And are they going to prove they're up to fire codes and whatnot? I mean, I'm not going to go after building codes, but is that something that we're going to have to clarify in some way before we give them a business license?
Through your worship, excellent question, Councillor Janice. So I'm going to take a jump back. So we put those provisions in the zoning bylaw to foster dialogue and discussion. So you don't have to require business licenses of your vacation rentals if you don't want to either, right? That is one way of trying to administer vacation rentals. Vacation rentals are very challenging to administer, right? So you need some way of tracking them to be able to actually administer vacation rentals. One of the most common ways of doing that is through business licensing. If you're going to require business licensing, you can add whatever conditions you fundamentally want onto that business licensing to ensure that they're being operated in the manner that the village wants. If you want fire code to be that one of those components, it can be. You can have hours of operation. You can have parking. You can have what is it do you want to administer again? The definition that I put in there was to trigger conversation.
Right.
We can make it simpler. We can make it more complex. What is the village looking for? We could make it to the point that you can just allow vacation rentals and not do anything beyond just saying, yeah, you can have them. Or you can have them in some particular areas based on conditions, right? And so that's one of those questions that sort of came out of looking at, what Zeballos is trying to achieve, what makes most sense for the village, and that administrative burden that comes along with beginning to regulate something. So I know I didn't really answer your question. So yes, we can do that. What we put in that zoning bylaw is to foster a conversation with council about what makes most sense for the village.
Right. I think, because of where we exist, and I think we're becoming and going to become more and more of a tourist destination. And I think that, for people to be able to live here, they need to do something for themselves to make their living. And I think we're going to be dealing with these vacation rentals more and more. And I think protecting, owners of these and protecting visitors to them is going to become very important. I think we need to look at that part in particular, and make sure things are running in a way that everybody's safe, so that we can exist that way going forward. That was the one big question I had, really. I like the format, and I like the simplicity in itself, and I think we're gonna find out quite a bit coming up here. about our new factors, right? So I'm okay with moving forward on it.
Perfect.
Through your worship,
Oh, go ahead.
may I ask a question? Just a question for clarity for my notes. Would council support the development of a business license bylaw to help regulate vacation rental?
I would definitely support that.
I would support that.
I would support that with the question through to staff. On some more information about what the current regulation policy is now. I'm not sure that a bylaw is necessary. Would it be better to do a policy, or I'm putting that through to you as you're the expert on this, CA?
Thank you, Mayor Colborne. It does draw to a larger question, one that has come up for us given our, our capacity, is even having a business license bylaw worth having for a community the size of Zeballos. We have found since I've been here that even in its form that it's in now is extremely difficult to administer. So, adding this next level, to administer short-term vacation rentals, bed and breakfasts, are we going to have the capacity to do it? And I think that's part of a much bigger conversation. I think if the bylaw is drafted correctly, and if our capacity stays as is, I think in the future it is something we'll be able to manage. But yeah, I think that question is part of a bigger discussion, possibly of another committee as a whole.
Perfect, thank you for that. And that's what I was wondering, because when I was looking through this and the administration of it, a lot of it relies on supposing we have certain things in place. And I know that there's a lot of things in here that are mentioned that we don't have in place currently. So I feel sometimes cart before the horse kind of situation, and I'm not sure where to land with that. I think that moving forward is definitely, but are we doing that in a way that's, first of all, telling to our community and alerting them to, these possible changes and things like that. And also if that is burdensome on this office, right? So something as simple as, in the very first administration kind of column in like 1.3, sufficient supply of pure and wholesome drinking water. Is that a village connection? Is that what that means? And then is that something that's included in a development package, or is that what we'll end up seeing as a development package or a business license package that would go out to people depending on which business you have, right? So that was kind of where my thought, same kind of direction, right? Councillor Deck, I see your hand up.
Thank you, your worship. I'm with Councillor Janice on this, but I don't think we're pushing to have it done right away. But in my mind, Zeballos is not the wild, wild west, even though half of our residents think it is. We're going to have some rules, and there's no way around it. Thank you.
Absolutely, and I think doing that in a way that kind of puts people on alert to that, right? So that we are rolling out, I think the package that we put together and the feedback that we got back has let people know, we want your opinion on how things are run, but things are regulated and there are changes happening. How far we go with that and how much we educate and how much we change things kind of depends on us, right? So I think that the feedback for the official community plan, the OCP, was really valuable in doing that. but also how are we preparing them when we're making these kinds of changes? So I know there are multiple short-term rentals in the community already. How are we reaching out to those businesses in particular? Is there one set of rules for things that have been done before and another set of rules of future developments and future business? That's where I have some questions about that. And I'm wondering if there's any feedback from either the CAO or Mr. Brooks on that. Is there a two sets of rules kind of, I know this is working into the future, but I want the rule, and what an administrative nightmare if there is two sets of rules, the things that are already existing and then going into the future. So if either of you as the CAO or Mr. Brooks could give me any feedback on that, that would be fantastic.
Thank you, Mayor. And I think I will get Kevin to speak to this because I'm unfamiliar, having not had official zoning other than the setback bylaw in Zeballos. How does legal non-conforming work in a situation like this, especially with something like short-term vacation rentals?
Yeah, thank you, CAO, through the mayor. But legal non-conforming is tricky. In the case, so how legal non-conforming works is basically if you establish a use on a parcel and it was lawfully established under the existing bylaw at the time, as soon as you change up that bylaw, that use can occur in perpetuity exactly as it is. And that's deemed legal non-conforming. Now, if a use is established non-lawfully to a bylaw, it's just illegal, right? And so it's just illegal or non-conforming. So legal non-conformance, it's on the onus of the property owner to prove out that they had the proper permits in place, etc., and approvals in place to operate a business in a particular fashion prior to a change or adoption of a bylaw. So that's legal non-conforming. In the case where you don't have a bylaw, how does it work? And that's an interesting nuance. It's not very common. And so with that one, if we were going to change the bylaw and begin to regulate certain uses in a particular fashion, I'd strongly recommend that we get legal counsel to comment on it if there is a concern there. It's not a situation I've ran into many times in my career, so.
Yeah, so this is, we're kind of inventing something right now that has never existed before. And so thank you for that. I appreciate that, that feedback. Because I know it'll come up in business licensing when people are going for business licenses. Well, how come we've never had to do this before? Right. And so why are the rules different now? And that's what we're trying to do is we're trying to proceed with safety, as Councillor Janice said, something that's safe, something where we don't reach a tipping point in Zeballos where everyone just has a vacation rental as a room for rent in their home, and that's okay, you know, but also to let people, as Councillor Janice said, have an opportunity to have some business and some income in a place that will become a tourist draw or already is a tourist draw. It's that balance. Councillor Janice.
The other part we have to be careful of is that, you know, first of all, I'll preface this with the fact that many communities are trying to claw back on governing these types of properties because it's creating some chaos in housing and in what they're allowed to do as a business. And we have an opportunity now to not have to get to the point where we're going backwards on it as we create this. And I think it's very important we concentrate on it because it's a huge issue right now in many communities. And because of the nature of ours, both with the looseness of what we're allowed to do and the fact that, you know, we are going to see an increase in what's happening with tourism. I think we need to definitely concentrate on this one item closely because we have very few houses and very few properties here. And if they're all empty all the time, and they're made to be rental income properties, nightly rental income properties, we're not going to have it. We're not going to have a town. Essentially, that's how few we have. So that's it for now. Thank you.
I am gonna put something in here as well, something that council might want to consider. So somewhere, I don't believe it's in this report. I'd have to find it. Somewhere in the correspondence, either one of the reports or in what's coming next is that official community plan, is regulating short-term rentals is not gonna help our housing stock. It's not gonna help to solve the issue of vacant homes for us, right? That's not, it informs that, but it's not going to add any stock to us. So
Right.
yeah, it's just something that I wanted to put out there for council to consider, right? It was a line that I read. I believe it was in one of Mr. Brooks's reports that said, this is not going to solve your vacant home issue, right? But it is a tool that we can use in order to promote those homes to maybe not be vacant. So I would ask if you wanted to delve into that, Mr. Brooks, I would love for you to give us some more on that.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Janice. It's a good point. So if we were to start regulating vacation rentals right now, what does that actually regulate? That does not regulate someone that owns a vacation home, right? It's just someone that doesn't live in Zeballos that owns a home there and leaves it vacant part of the year. You can't control that through zoning. You can't control that through vacation rental. You can only control that if they begin to rent that property out for commercial purposes to other people, right? And so that there's a nuance there. And right now, the provincial government hasn't given local governments the authority to control how long a person lives in a house that they happen to own within a community. So the point that the mayor makes is accurate. Regulating vacation rentals will not control vacant homes that are owned by people that use them for vacation home. Fundamentally two different things, sadly.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
CAO Nelson Smith has an offering for us.
Thank you, Mayor Colborne. I do believe moving into the future, what it will affect, and this is something that we're seeing sort of on a day-to-day basis here, is there are people specifically looking for vacant properties in Zeballos to use as short-term vacation rentals. So by us administering how short-term vacation rentals are used, in effect can help alleviate some of these vacant properties, because there are folks out there specifically looking for a property here so that they can open up a business doing short-term vacation rentals. So it will claw back some of our stock if we can regulate it.
That's another great point. And also in this bylaw, I'd like to kind of start going through it kind of piece by piece, but included in this bylaw is if you must, is there a preference on council that you must live on your property in order to have a short-term vacation rental in it? How many days do you want those people to live there? Or is it allowable and admissible by this council to let that run on a property management level, which would probably be the cleaners or the people who are doing the maintenance or something to that effect. So there are all sorts of options and things that we may do and restrictions we may put on that. And that as well delves into issues like parking. If there's someone who's living in the home, they need a parking space. There also needs to be a parking space for a visitor, those kinds of things. So this is a really, everything in the both items, all three items that are on the agenda tonight are kind of go hand in hand together. So I appreciate the conversation, and if anybody has anything to kind of say in general about that, I'd appreciate feedback. Okay, I have a couple of specifics if we could. So like I mentioned in 1.3, that's a village connection kind of issue. That's village water. I think, would that suffice for something like that? If we're going through the actual administration of the bylaw, I think it's page 16. Does that suffice as a village water connection? Looking on ways to simplify it, to make it very readable and easy for people who may be using it. Is that something we want to consider?
Yeah, so this is, correct me if I'm wrong, Kevin, so 1.3 is any property,
Yes.
not just vacation rentals. So before,
No buildings constructed until there's a village water connection.
yep,
Perfect. Because I think that is sufficient supply of, I'm looking at easing this for people who are coming in here and want to develop. We're gonna get our own stand of rainwater. Who knows what's gonna happen in the
Right.
future, right? So that's a village connection essentially.
yes.
And then the
Well,
access, oh, go
If I
ahead.
may,
Mr. Hart.
if I may, Mayor, and if I may, CEO. Um, understand that when anybody does connect to or provide any kind of water, if they do it legally, it must meet island health requirements for water quality.
Mhm.
So your system does that you provide. If someone drills a well, it has to meet that potable water quality. Right, and so for those purposes. So if it's there's other regulatory authorities that ensure water quality. It's not a sort of authority of local government. And what I mean by that is if someone were to have a property in Zeballos and want to put a well in, and they're in an area that water service isn't provided and want to put a well in, the village does not approve that well. The village has no authority to comment or approve that well. It is the provincial government that does. So I just want to make that nuanced clarity.
Perfect. Thank you for that, because I appreciate that in itself, knowing that that's why it's worded that way, that it's sufficient of pure and wholesome drinking water, right? So that's good for me to know.
I have,
Thank you, the CAO, yeah.
thank you. I have seen bylaws in other communities that it's an absolute requirement that you have a connection to city water and city sanitation. So, and I think that's typically done through your water regulation bylaw and your wastewater regulation bylaw.
And that's why I'm wondering, is that something we want to put in here that says, because I think with our zoning, what we're trying to do is we would like to have eyes on the ground as soon as possible.
Yeah.
Let's
If-
start
if-
these
if-
conversations.
Yeah, if I may, Mayor, your zoning bylaw does not have the authority to require connection to water.
Okay. Okay.
It'll be those other two bylaws.
Okay, perfect. So something to
Correct.
highlight for you for further.
Mhm.
Okay, great. And then the access permit. I'm unsure about two. Who administers, what's the administrative burden on 1.3.2 bracket? What is, who regulates that and how would someone go about getting one of those? Would a Ministry of Highways? Transportation, Highways, Communication?
Yes, through the mayor to Mr. Brooks. I do believe that was the intention of that. So any properties that are on highways that are governed by Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure would need to get an access permit through that provincial ministry.
So, and does that make clear to the person who is developing via a permit process through us? How do they know that Maquinna Avenue is not just a village? Do you see where, yeah,
Well, and thank you, Mayor, and that is, it's the property owner's responsibility to be aware of the zoning and any other bylaws, policies that govern the property, whether it be provincial, federal, or municipal.
due diligence
Yeah.
essentially on buying the property.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you for that. Let's see. What another question I had was, so you answered the two sets of rules for different eras or different people. Are you comfortable with that answer that's on that CAO? Are we doing this moving forward? So next business license cycle, for instance?
Oh, are we back to vacation rentals?
Yeah,
It's really going to come to what council's direction is on this. I'm obviously very happy to keep it in the bylaw. Another option would be to remove it, have more consideration over time, and then do an amendment to the zoning bylaw to include it. That's one of our options.
so for that short-term rental piece of the zoning bylaw.
Correct.
Perfect. And considering Councillor Janice's kind of comments on that, how is council feeling with that conversation? Is that something that we'd like to do, is go through the zoning bylaw, pull out those short-term rental pieces, have a bigger conversation about that, and then add that back in? Or as with wishes on how we want our staff to administer that, whether that's next business license cycle, if that's the way we choose to regulate? How are we feeling about that? This is all about, it's a cow, it's conversation, right? So let's hear your ideas.
I definitely think that this is the time to explore it. I think it's the heaviest thing in this whole document, and it's the one that's going to affect the village most, potentially. There's not a lot of building going on. There's not a lot of real estate changing hands, but there is quite a bit of potential for people in existing spaces to start doing this quite a bit. And it has to be looked at closely so that everybody's comfortable and knows their parameters, right? And there's talk of it all over, and not just in Zeballos, but all over the province, right? And people are hungry, and they're looking for ways to make money, and it's turned out to be a very successful way. And so I would say we could consider having a closer look at it together, thinking it through, and then talking about it further. And maybe we could have some other councillors here to include some input. That would be nice. So
Thank you for that. And I will put out just to Mr. Brooks, so you know, there are currently 8 homes for sale in Zeballos. My last count. So there is the potential for things to change, and to change very quickly. So Councillor Deck, you had your hand up.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. Once again, I'm with you, Justin. I don't think we have to push anything through, but we definitely shouldn't be taking a step backwards, because as you all know, to get anything through in a village council takes some time. It took almost 2 years to get a dump truck, for crying out loud. So we should not drag our feet on this. Please and thank you.
Absolutely not, but I do, would you be in favor of pulling that short-term rental piece out of this zoning bylaw until we did have a closer look and some more council input on that?
I think it's a good idea.
Okay. Was that, yeah, go ahead.
I think from an administrative perspective, something for council to consider is leaving it in, but in a simplistic form.
Okay.
So having it in there, and one of the provisions I've seen that Mr. Brooks has included is the property owners to provide a contact number for themselves or a representative located within the village and available 24 hours a day. That would help us as administrators if there is an issue, if there's rowdies, if there's, that we can get immediate contact. So no other regulations other than, leaving that with the village office. And it will coincide with the current business license bylaw that they will have to have a business license. And I think that just gives us one extra piece that will help us administer currently.
So something like short-term rentals are permissible within village limits in a certain zone? Or how, or within all zones, as long as these requirements are met, which is a call number 24 hours a day, something like that?
That's what I'm thinking.
So how comfortable is council with that? And then allowing, so they are permissible and governed under a business licensing model, but that the village has a contact for while we massage kind of what else we want to do with things like parking, how many days if they have to live on the property, all these other kind of things that have been included in these considerations. Councillor Deck.
Thank you. Yes, I think simplistic, that's a small step forward, but it's not going backwards. So I'm all for that. Thank you, CAO.
I can work with that too.
Okay.
Mayor Colburn.
CAO Nelson Smith has something else.
Thank you, Mayor Colburn. Through to Mr. Brooks again. Just maybe some clarification from your end for me and council. The reason I brought that idea forward is because if we remove vacation rentals completely, does that, if they're not in zoning, something not specifically listed in zoning, therefore is not allowed, am I correct?
That's correct. If it's not explicitly permitted, it's prohibited under zoning bylaw.
So anything that is not
there is-
expressly permitted is prohibited in a zoning
Correct.
bylaw.
Correct. So if you utilize, there is an opportunity to utilize that approach to control new while you address your updated bylaw. So what I mean by this, right now you have existing vacation rentals that are happening. I suspect under law, those would be deemed as soon as the zoning bylaw is adopted as legal non-conforming because they were established prior to the adoption of the bylaw legally. Right? There wasn't anything saying they couldn't do it. If we bring it in a zoning bylaw that defines short-term rental, but does not permit it in any of the zones, it means you have a definition of short-term rental, but it's actually not permitted in any of the zones. What that means, if anybody that comes in and wants a new one, they will have to rezone to allow a short-term rental on a property in Zeballos, which means it has to come to council to legally operate from that forward for all new ones. That provides you with a interim measure to control short-term rentals while you develop a short-term rental policy and regulatory framework for the village. And that is an opportunity that you do have right now because of the ones that are already established will be continue to operate under legal non-conforming, and then all new ones would have to come to council to allow those to be approved. At that time, through rezoning, you can put conditions on those new ones until you have your new regulatory framework in place.
So,
oh, go ahead, Councillor Janice.
if I may. So established would be only ones that have applied for a business license. Is that correct?
Yeah, they have to have some proof that they are operating legally, correct?
Yeah, I'm pretty happy with that. That makes sense to me, because that would include I don't know if anybody's doing it, but if anybody's operating outside of the lines, then they would stay outside of the lines going forward, and we could start over with them. So I think so. What's the idea here? Is that we say that you have to have somebody operating available to be contacted 24 hours a day, And we put that on paper?
Yep.
That's-
We can, but there's a whole bunch of different options on what
Yeah.
those look like, Counselor.
Right. So this needs to be addressed before we follow through. Is that correct?
Well, again, you have different opportunity. If you wanted to follow that regulatory approach that I just mentioned, probably what I'd do a minor update to your business license bylaw to add the particular conditions you want addressed as part of the business license bylaw. And then we'd proceed concurrently with the zoning bylaw update, relatively as is, with the minor tweaks that would be necessary. And then that buys us time to take a step back and dive deep into vacation rentals for Zeballos and develop a program and regulatory framework that is much more detailed to address some of the concerns that council has brought forward tonight.
Can I just
Sounds good.
highlight
I'm
in
on
here
board with
though
that.
that we do not have a business license bylaw.
We do.
We do have a business license
Yeah.
bylaw.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay, go ahead, Councillor Janice.
Thank you. That sounds like the right direction from a pro to me.
He's more than just a hat rack.
So that does not prohibit
got a nice
us
smile,
though
too.
from going through the zoning bylaw process still as well tonight and giving you our feedback on that as well.
Through your worship, yeah, no, we'd get all your feedback on the zoning bylaw and all of that stuff tonight, correct? And then we proceed with zoning as we're doing now, knowing that we are going to provide a definition of short-term rental, but not enable them within a zone. And then knowing that we're going to proceed with developing a policy and program for detailed short-term rental with a recommendation from me at this moment to do a minor amendment to the business license bylaw to provide those conditions of what it's going to require for a business license for short-term rental.
Perfect. Thank you for that. Councillor Deck.
Thank you, your worship. Yes, I like it too, Kevin. Again, it's a small step forward, but we got to keep going forward because there's going to be a lot of work to do in the future. Don't you think?
Through the worship, yes, I certainly do think so. And I also believe that this provides opportunity for the people that are doing it right now, correctly now, I mean, not necessarily right now, but doing it correctly now. But also still provides opportunity for people that want to purchase in Zeballos and have a short-term rental. There's just a process in place that they now need to go through that's clear, and that it needs to come in front of council for council's consideration prior to adoption. And that means it gives council an opportunity to provide input and the community to provide community input prior to a short-term rental being established until we have a new regulatory framework in place, please.
Yes, since we're the new property owners, there's no surprises.
Exactly.
That's
See
right.
what you need. Yeah, very good. Thank you. I'm out.
And then also in this zoning bylaw, so we're referring to this as a short-term rental. In the zoning bylaw, it refers to it as a vacation rental.
Mhm.
Apples
Yep,
and
thank you,
oranges,
Your
same
Worship.
thing.
Thank you, Your Worship. Those are fundamentally the same thing, yes. And so, we can provide clarity. People use that terminology as it is the same thing.
Is there an opportunity to put that in the glossary, in the interpretation as a short-term rental? And then
Your
leave
Worship.
vacation homes in case that is another thing that comes up in the future for us?
Yep.
Is that okay with council that they change that from vacation rental to short-term rental? Same thing, it makes it really clear. The interpretation says it means the licensed use of a residential single detached dwelling or a licensed secondary suite as temporary lodging for less than 30 days with paying guests. Is there anything you want to massage in that in the definition of a short-term rental? Because I think that was another question that you had, Mr. Brooks, is if that is something that we wanted to be more well-defined.
I think it's reasonable.
So as we go through, then we can, and we kind of massage after we do that, the business license bylaw tweak. Then we can go through and say, how many days do we want them used? How many zones can we use them in? How do we regulate the signs and that kind of thing? Those zoning options considerations. I think that was page 27 of our report. Perfect. Thank you for that. Okay, so that gives us a little bit of time and structure to do the short-term rental. So this will, that page 27 on your agenda will come back to us. Just for that part. But short-term rental. And I think actually if you wanted to turn to that page, council, page 27. Unless we had anything, anybody wanted to go through this kind of minutely, the bylaw. I had a couple of questions, but they all kind of depend on, yeah, that one right
Yeah,
there.
I'll share a screen so everybody can see it.
Perfect. And I'll go back to that. And this, and this, and this, okay. So that answers our short-term rental kind of question. Let's kind of go through these if we can and answer these questions for Mr. Brooks, because I think that will help inform this bylaw more without going through it minutely, although I do have a couple of questions on the previous pages. Does that sound reasonable, council?
Sure.
Yes.
Perfect. So do we want more zones that are currently outlined in this map 2? So that's the page before. It is the map 2, the zoning map of the village of Zeballos official community plan. There's village mixed use, there's a natural environment zone, there's a marine industrial zone, and there's a village boundary. Do we want any more zones that are currently outlined here? Or is this a matter of KISS? Keep it simple, sir.
Keep it simple. What?
Keep it simple, sir. I wasn't gonna say the other meaning of KISS in a.
I think that's enough for us. Absolutely.
Councillor Jack, I saw your hand up.
Yes, that's enough. Keep it simple.
Perfect. Do we want to regulate the use of signs? Is something that will come back under that short-term rental conversation? Is that correct, Mr. Brooks?
Through your worship, the signs are regulated completely differently. Signs would apply to all different types of uses, not just short-term rentals. You can regulate signs through the Local Government Act and Community Charter Authority to regulate signs. So the fundamental question, does the village want to regulate signage?
And what were your council's answers for this? I had no, and my reason behind that was because we were trying to promote business and community, right? You hang your placard out and you, but also that I know that they can become a problem. So what was council, I'll go through and ask Councillor Janice maybe first if he had an answer to that. Did we want to regulate the use of signs?
No,
Or if that was
I don't
something
think it's a problem at this point.
Okay, and Councillor Jack?
Likewise.
Perfect. So number 4 was fence height. I'm gonna ask the CAO, is there a current fence height limitation in the old OCP?
No, not, I don't think that anything's been addressed about fence height anywhere.
Okay,
Um,
Mr. Brooks, did you have any?
Nope, I do not. And that, again, that's just a question. Do you want to have more regulation in the zoning bylaw to regulate fence height? Is fence height and fencing an issue within the community? If it's not, I'd recommend you probably don't want to regulate it right now. If it is, then you probably want to take a look at regulating fence height to address potential issues that the village has been dealing with.
I don't think it's a problem at this point.
Councillor Deck?
Likewise, not a problem.
I know it has been in the past, but I also think that with our setback bylaw, I think most of that has been accounted for. I think it's a conversation that happens between neighbors. I would hope that in today's day and age, this is a pleasant conversation that happens between neighbors. Councillor Deck.
Yes, well, my shrubs are 13, 14 feet high, and I don't want any trouble.
Yeah, and I don't think that's a regulation, an added regulation that we need to be doing, although I will remind people that the reason we have a setback bylaw is because somebody built on a road. I will put that out there, so if you want to, do any preventative measures, then that's something that might consider. Lot coverage percentage, is there anything there that anybody had any thoughts on? I will open it up by saying, when I read both of these documents, I think that the direction of the province at this point is to maximize lot usage. But that's the province's prerogative. That's not necessarily ours, but I'll just put that out there to include things like secondary homes, carriage homes, and added housing stock. So up to council, I'd ask your thoughts on that. Lot coverage percentage. Councillor
I
Deck.
haven't seen anybody build anything here.
Oh, thank you, Councillor Denise. Councillor Deck.
Yes, my lot's so small, I can't even get Janice's boat in my backyard.
Well, I do know that although people who live on council's lots maybe I'm not sure if anybody's had a look at mine. There are lots in the village that are quite large and that are empty. I'm just putting that out there. Is that something that we want to regulate? The percentage of the lot coverage, that we don't want to see any more than a certain percentage used for housing? Is that something we want to delve into, or are we going to leave that unregulated? Which
think it's
means
fine
if
the way it
it's
is.
not in a, oh, sorry, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Brooks. If it's not contained in here, then what does that mean for people who are looking to develop an empty lot? And then I'll come to Councillor Janice and then Councillor Deck. Go ahead, Mr.
Yeah,
Brooks.
so if lot coverage is not in there, lot coverage will not be regulated. So what that means is a person could, as long as they meet the setback requirements, they can build as much over that area as long as they're within the setbacks as they wish.
So I have a follow-up question to that, but I said I would go to Councillor Janice. Councillor Janice, you had something to say?
Nope, we're good.
Okay.
I just said just what I said. I don't think it's necessary.
Hey, Councillor Deck.
Likewise, I don't think it's a necessary concern. No.
So my follow-up question then is, on a developable lot, how can we require a parking percentage? Because I think that that is something that we definitely do need to discuss. I know that there have been developments happen in the community before that have gone to the setback and built right on those setback lines that have not included any percentage for parking. I know that parking is the key strategic priority for this council, and I'm wondering if to Mr. Brooks, if you've seen any development requirements that have to have a certain percentage for parking included in them.
Through your worship, great question. Yeah, in your zoning bylaw, you can actually have parking requirements and you can tie those parking requirements to use. Right, so for example, if you build a single detached residential home, you have to have 2 parking stalls. And so you can put those types of provisions within your zoning bylaw if that's something that council wanted to consider.
And I would ask that, oh, Councillor Deck, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. We don't like to agree with the mayor too often, but in this case, we should have something like that. Thank you.
22. 3.3.
Okay, so page 22 of your zoning bylaw, agenda, zoning bylaw. It's 32.2, is that what you were just mentioning?
3.3, required off-street parking.
Okay. So this is on new development. So off-street, required off-street parking. So off-street vehicular parking or garage spaces shall be provided in accordance with the standards in this section. Requirement with its nature. Okay, so I had a comment on here that, you know, it was so one dwelling, one residential dwelling had 1 parking space. Is that how the graph works? Below it?
Through to Mr. Brooks. It was that the intention of the table on page 7 of the zoning bylaw?
Through your worship, yes, it is.
Perfect. So this is already embedded into this zoning bylaw. So we
Yes.
don't have to do a lot percentage coverage. It's already in there.
For parking, that is correct, yes.
Perfect. Thank you so much. All right. I don't necessarily agree with the chart, but I'm gonna let it go. I don't think that, especially in this day and age and where we live, that we're, you know, we need to require for an institution to have a parking spot for each employee. Things like that. I think that with our lack of space, but for new development, I think a guideline is good to have for people that are developing anything in the village. Okay, so back to page 27, mixed village mixed use zone. Do we want to continue to allow full-time RV units instead of dwellings? Mr. Brooks, was that on residential properties?
Through your worship, yes, it is. This is one of the big questions that is happening right around, well, North America, to be honest. Affordable housing is hard to come by, as all of you do know. And so there is being more and more consideration given to the how to provide opportunities for alternative housing forms. And so a lot of communities such as Zeballos are starting to look if they want to consider allowing people to live in RVs permanently in some areas within their community. There are pitfalls to it. And you know, it's a legal gray area. Recreational vehicles are not built for permanent residency. It states that right in the CSA Z240 for recreational vehicles. And so there is a odd nuance that even as a village, you are allowed to permit them to be lived in permanently. They're not legally constructed for permanent residencies, and there's a legal gray area associated with it. So it's something you can consider, and it's on something that you may want to contemplate. If you do, then we can write some provisions around that to allow it to occur, but it doesn't come without some level of risk.
Yeah, thank you for that. And it's also, I think, a safety issue within the village to do with fire, to do with visual look of the village core, all of those kinds of things. I don't know that they should be allowed to be a primary residence. I think that they should be, this is just my opinion, they should be allowed to be lived in while a primary residence is being constructed, absolutely, as kind of a short-term stopgap kind of a measure. But to the counselors that are here, do we want to continue to allow full-time RV units instead of dwellings when we're thinking about things like safety of, and also, are those permitted, something to think about further when we go into the short-term rental? Is it permissive for those full-time dwellings that are RVs to be short-term rentals? So it opens up another kind of question upon a question, but I pass that on to council for just some feedback. Councillor Deck.
Yes, on on that question, thank you, Your Worship. I don't think we should allow RV full-time occupancy. Most of the RVs around here are showing their age, and I don't think they're particularly safe. That's my main concern. Thank you.
Thank you for that.
So
Oh, go ahead, Councillor Janice.
we had this problem in Ucluelet and Tofino.
Yeah.
And they weren't allowed to have any occupancy on their properties of any type of RV or anything that was movable. And it became a real dilemma because there was a lack of housing in communities where there was lots of tourism. And so in the summer, people had nowhere to go because of this. And they ended up changing the rules to, I think, allow one. I don't know if you know anything about that, Mr. Brooks, but and that seemed to work well. And I would be interested in maybe allowing something like that, because then you're giving a little, but you're ensuring that a property doesn't have a row of dilapidated, or they don't have to be dilapidated, a row of RVs sitting on their property being used in that way. But with the other thing I was going to say, I don't think there's too many people that would live in full time in an RV unless it's out of extreme necessity. And maybe we have to observe that a little bit. And most of what we'll deal with is seasonal employees looking for somewhere to be able to sleep. So I think we are okay with this. I would be okay with limiting the amount you're allowed to have per property, because I think that would appease a lot of neighbors. You know, that there was something in place that you're allowed one structure or one recreational vehicle or trailer or whatever it might be. So that interests me to change that in that way. Thank you.
I would actually agree with you there with the limit of available housing stock that we do have in the village currently, and kind of moving forward. I don't know that I would like to look into that, that it's not the primary unless there's building happening, but as a secondary, that it may be permissible, something kind of in that kind of, to that effect. And also, I do think it's important that we are promoting the use of our RV, that, you know, we're collecting some kind of income over. I mean, I do know that we need to look at our fees and charges bylaw, because that should be one of the primary goals of this council, really is to change some of that structure so that we are making some, you know, having some more income come in so that we can address some of these issues, right? how are you feeling about that, Councillor Deck? And is that part of a short-term rental? Can we highlight that as part of a short-term rental kind of conversation going forward?
We can have all of these discussions moving forward.
Yeah. Does that sound reasonable, Councillor Deck?
Yeah, well, I got one foot on the wagon, but the trouble I have, people living in older trailers in Zeballos or older RVs, when the winter comes, they put a wood stove in there and it's a fire hazard to them and to all the properties around them. I don't have a problem with RVs for half the year when it's not freezing cold, but I just don't like what I see in a few places in this town.
Is
Thank
there
you.
any provision for like a CSA approval proof on that as it's a secondary suite or something like that? Is that something that you've ever
Yeah.
seen, Mr. Brooks?
Through your worship, you will never get a approval for putting a wood stove in a recreational vehicle because they're not deemed as a structure under building code.
Yeah.
So you'll never get an approval to have put a wood stove in a recreational vehicle, so that won't happen. The RVs themselves are already approved under CSA Z240 for recreational vehicles. Like I said, they're for temporary use, and so therefore they've been outfitted with a heating system, cooling system, all those things for temporary residency. And this is where that wacky nuance I was talking about starts coming in, right? Is it something the village wants to do? The village does not want to be recommending that people put wood stoves into RVs because there's no way of ensuring that it meets any kind of standard of any kind because there's not a building inspector in the world that would approve that. Right. So
Yeah.
again, this is one of those nuances.
So what if we, so right now we're not allowing the use of them because we don't regulate them. What if we leave it out? What does that do? Is that another, could you go, is that another,
Through your worship, if you don't allow RVs for permanent residency, it doesn't changes nothing because right now they shouldn't be used for permanent residency anyway. So there's that. There's also other opportunities. If you're going to, if the, this is a bit outside of the bylaw, but I know the village is looking at the existing RV park and stuff like that. If you're going to, you can choose an area and say, we will allow it in this specific place. You already own your RV park. If I was council, and you wanted to test the waters on it, it'd likely be in a program of that nature where you own the property and you can actually design it in a manner that is going to be suitable and you control the land well enough to deal with some of the potential issues that could arise, like people inadvertently putting wood stoves in them and that shouldn't be. Because you're the owner of the land, then you could control something of that nature from happening.
all right, so hearing what we have heard, where are we with this now? Is this something that we want to continue to allow? Is it something that we, I mean, no, it's not that we don't allow it right now, they're just putting it into this zoning bylaw.
If I may,
Please, Councillor Jennings.
Council, I just don't think it's that big of an issue. Like a lot of these other things. So I'd say we leave things the way they are and address it if it becomes a bigger issue. That's my opinion.
Okay. Although I do like the limitation of one. I think that on any particular parcel, I think that's an important piece. So I don't know where staff, would go with that, just leaving it alone or making it admissible for one. CAO.
Thank you. Further to what Mr. Brooks was saying, having worked on the public works side of things in small municipality where RVs were allowed as primary units, you also start to administratively and operationally have to deal with the poor connections to the RV, you know, furthering the exacerbation of frozen water lines, burst water lines, cross contamination, as well as sanitary not being properly hooked up, therefore you're dealing with environmental spill. And so these are some of the things that I dealt with on the ground in operation. So I think something further for council to consider as we move forward with this is not everybody, like Councillor Deck pointed out, not everybody is looking at the best options when they're setting up their recreational vehicle.
Something to think about moving forward, council. Let's kind of put those two away. This zoning bylaw will come back to us for another kick at the can. This is not gonna die here. Let's just put that away for now. I think it may be some further consideration, but maybe through the CAO and Mr. Brooks can kind of, hearing the conversation here, kind of work through maybe something that might, you know, appease all. But it's not that we're not gonna please everybody all the time. So for time's sake, do we want to allow for greater density options for fourplexes for apartment buildings? Of course, being within the capacity of our fire department where height is concerned. CAO Nelson Smith.
The considerations on this one to take into is utility capacity, water servicing, and on the west side, sanitary sewer servicing.
Through to council. I had this checked off as, oh, go Councillor Denise.
It sounds to me like we need to have some kind of perimeter around this. Probably that if you want to do something on a larger scale, you'd need to consult with council prior to doing so.
So anything more than a singular dwelling would require some kind of development permit through the village office.
I think a duplex would be okay, right? But anything bigger than that, I would suggest you need to consult and make sure that we can accommodate it. And make sure that it can be like the fire code would. I think you're up to 3 stories, you're okay, but I think there'd be some consultation involved for sure. I think there'd need to be.
Absolutely. On this side, it would be a island health sewer issue or a septic issue. And then on the other side, I know it would be a sewer capacity issue, but just to like start off the conversation, we don't have any more available hookups than a single unit on a dwelling, as far as I know, at our sewer capacity right now, especially. Yeah, that's definitely something to consider. Although I would like to see some more housing stock, I think that's definitely a development permit conversation. Does that give you enough information?
Yeah, I think like Mr. Brooks has pointed out previously, with us leaving it out, it provides a developer an opportunity to either use a temporary use permit, but basically come to council prior to you know, just starting to build a multi-level.
So that brings me back to the last question. If we leave RVs out of this conversation, do they have to come to council? Because it would be a temporary use permit? Through Mr. Brooks.
Through your worship, it depends on how we choose to regulate them in the zoning bylaw. If we define recreational vehicles as for temporary use and someone wants to use it for permanent use, then they would have to amend the zoning bylaw or do a temporary use permit to allow it to be used for permanent residency.
I'll put that out there as that might be an option to council, but also moving through because of time issues. Do we want to include liquor and cannabis as a primary? Can you can you explain this further to me as a primary residence or a primary usage?
Primary
The
use.
three worship. Yeah, through your worship as a primary use within, as basically as a retail use within the community.
So that question is to council. Do we want to include liquor and cannabis? Or do we want to have more control over that, leave it out? And then we would have more control over it because they'd have to come through us for a zoning permit or a zoning rezoning. Councillor Deck?
This is Zeballos. Of course, we want primary liquor and cannabis. No question.
Anybody wanting anything different has to rezone.
I would like not to. I would like for it to come to council. And the reason being is the close proximity to everything here. So I mean, we're within a kilometer of a school anywhere we go in the village. You know, I do think that's something that, but the current liquor store is where the liquor store is. I don't know that anybody else, I think it would be, actually don't know if it would be a saturation if we had another one in the community. Sorry, all jokes aside. So I've got one that's absolutely uses as primary and one opinion that it should be done on a case by case via a temporary permit, but
I don't think there's a, if you want to hear mine, I don't think there's a, again, there's really just no issue as far as I think, because I don't think anybody's going to be doing anything different until something changes, like population, or because there's that little liquor store that we have, nobody's going to do anything different. So
yeah. Okay. So maybe leave that over there. Gas stations, I think same thing. Is that not right, council? Gas stations, in order to put a gas station in, there are a lot of regulations. And I know right now there are pools that need to be added with above ground systems, and it is regulated to the max. I don't think anything is going to change in this little village, especially with the population. I think we're going to increase by 9 people and then go down by 9 people and then increase again by 9 people in 2065 or something like that. So this is another one of those kind of leave out situations. Is that correct?
Yep.
Right? Okay. Leave out. Vacation rentals is, we've done. Manufactured home standards. The CAO and I had multiple go-arounds of this the other day when we were talking about the mobile home park. And I think that they should be included on the application to put a mobile home in the mobile home park. But I think other than that, that's the onus on the person who's putting them in. I don't know how council feels about that. I think that we regulate what goes in our mobile home park by putting those kinds of things in the future. How does everybody else feel about this?
I don't think there's a problem. I think we're fine.
No, I'm ambivalent.
Okay, so no limitations on that. And then the final couple of questions on the back. Oh, I don't think we missed anything on that. Pretty comprehensive. Do you want to include household boats or float homes used as residential in a marine industrial zone? Councillor Janice?
Same thing. I don't think we even have anybody living in that situation. So
I don't think so either, but I do think so. Then it reverts back to a temporary use permit as well.
Mhm.
Perfect. And that's good because I do think there are multiple environmental considerations to be had with having things like that, especially in the delicacy of what is the bay in Zeballos. So I don't think we're gonna see it, so we'll require someone to have a permit. Anybody missed anything? I don't think so. And then the natural environment zone. I wanted to have a quick conversation about this because on the zone map, I think we should have some consideration for making that bigger. If you would pull it up, CAO, what I'm talking about is a small section. I hate to say, people's names in this, but the only way we're gonna, so across the street from Totem Bar Excavating, I think there is a small chunk. Yep, you can just highlight it there. Not maybe half of what he's kind of circling right there. I think we should bump that out because I think that that's a developable piece of property that we could actually maybe have some kind of development on. There's sewer already over on that side already. And I don't think we should cut ourselves off from having a piece of property that we possibly could develop on. So in front of if you're looking at the ball field on the left of the skate park, there's a piece that Totem Bar has already cleared there. And I think it's one of the very few pieces of land besides in the back of the mobile home park that we could include to be a future development in Zeballos. I just wanted to open that up to conversation.
Would be more right in there.
Nope, way less. Here, excuse me guys for a second. So that's Totem Bar right there.
Yeah,
So just right here.
right.
Yep, not even that far back. It doesn't have to go, but just right to there. Yeah, like that. This piece right in here. How do we feel about that? The only reason I asked council is because I think it's a missed opportunity to not have a developable piece, to have someplace that's in a, yeah, that's better. Yeah, to have someplace that is already, we already can't project for development. I think we're doing this mapping exercise right now. I think we should include it. What are your thoughts? Councillor Denise.
I think that sounds like a great idea.
Councillor Dack.
I think it sounds like a great idea.
Well, that was easy. Where's my Staples pen? Okay. Thank you, folks. I just think it was limiting to us to include it in here and not have a little bump out of that it was a developable. I don't know if there's any environmental kind of investigations that we would have to do before developing. I'm not saying that that's not an environmentally sensitive area or anything like that. I just do think we should allow ourselves the levity to go through that process if we ever wanted to develop it. Of course, we're responsible council and we would look at those things before we offered that up for development. All right, that was that piece and the short-term rental piece, because we are going to come back to that. Only other question I had was the general provisions, page 22 of the actual bylaw. At the top, 3.1, use permitted in all zones. The following uses are permitted in all zones. The top two are schools and hospitals, and I think those should not be permitted in all zones. I think that they should be taken out of that Rockfall, because there was already a school in the Rockfall hazard area, and there was already a hospital in the Rockfall hazard area, and they've both been taken out. Would you have any comments on that, Mr. Brooks?
Rockfall hazard area is not a zone. So that's a provision of the development permit guidelines under the OCP. So
Okay.
if we don't permit them in all zones, then we need to create a new zone that's specifically for institutional uses, which is
Okay.
fine, we can do so.
Yeah.
If council wishes to do so, then we'll need to identify all the areas within the community in which institutional uses should, or properties that should be zoned for institutional uses. If we're going to do an institutional use zone, then all village properties, hospital, police, fire, schools, all of those need to be identified and a new zone created to outline those specific uses.
Amazing. Thank you for that answer. Appreciate it. Okay, have you heard enough to, oh, Councillor Denise?
I think that we should have a close look at what Mr. Brooks just mentioned. I think we do need institutional zoning. I think that that would be a very, very smart thing at this point in our community to instate. And I think we should have a closer look at that. So I'm going to leave it at that.
Okay. Can you elaborate on that? I'm just wondering why. That I'm just a curiosity.
I just feel like that's a smart plan going forward, that we zone those in particular. And
Okay,
I don't know enough about it,
okay,
but it seems to me that that should happen in a community.
okay. I mean, I'm 100% willing to look at that for sure, and what that would mean for our zoning bylaw.
Mhm.
Do you have any other comments on that, Mr. Brooks?
Yeah. Through the worship, it's not a significant change to your zoning bylaw. We'd add an additional zone called institutional.
Yeah.
We'd work with you and the crew at the village to identify all the properties that are currently institutional. And we'd color them blue because blue is the color for institutional on a zoning map. And we'd color them all blue and we'd have an institutional zone that identifies particular specific institutional uses for those parcels. Be aware that when we do that, then anything else is not permitted on those parcels. We've zoned it specifically for institutional uses. It's not a cumbersome exercise for us to do so. So if it's the direction of council, we can certainly pull something together in probably fairly quick order to establish an institutional zone for you.
Okay, through to CAO.
Thank you, Mayor. Further to your comment about the rockfall hazard zone, there are a couple of buildings already in existence that wouldn't, be subject to the rockfall hazard that could be institutionalized should the ownership change, like the Cedars Inn or the hotel next to you. Within the rockfall hazard zone could be institutionalized. So this having institutional zones may help alleviate those dangers.
I would love to have some more information on that for sure. That brings me to a whole nother question about the Crown land empty lot issue. Councillor Deck.
Yes, thank you. Excuse me. To our unverified guest through the mayor. Now, I admit I know even less about institutional areas than Justin Janice. So would you just pick some area in Zeballos and suggest to us this is where institutions should go? Or would you leave it up to us to decide where they should go?
Through the worship, thank you for that question, Councillor. What we would do is we would actually determine the existing uses on the parcels. We'd only zone the parcels currently that are being used for institutional use as institutional use. Once that was done, we'd review that with council and determine if there is other areas needed for future potential institutional uses. Typically, you want institutional uses to be near institutional uses, right? You don't want them spread out all over the place. Generally, you want them relatively close to one another. So we'd then work with council at that time to go, okay, here's all our institutional uses. This is, we'll know what all of them are. Like you got the hospital and the school and the fire hall and town hall and the library across the road and stuff like that. And we had to get those all established and then go, okay, here's what we have right now. Do we foresee additional area needed for institutional use? Yes or no? And then we talk through it. If we do, then we can look at some other properties, likely village-owned properties, that we could then add as institutional use zone properties also.
Great. So we give you the ball, you run with it, and then we talk about it.
Yes.
Sounds good.
Thank you for that, and that brings me to a whole other plethora of questions about that empty lot. That's not village property, that is crown property, and alleviating some of the liability kind of things on that as well. So if you could get together with the CAO and maybe have that conversation as well, I think that might be a piece for us to have some more information on, as well as this other as well as these other things that council has been brought up to council. By council, sorry. Okay, folks, where are we at here? We are.
Just for some clarity
Yeah.
moving forward, so is that unanimous from council, we're to look at institutional?
I
Yes.
think that would be maybe another zone that I might be able to agree to, but I don't think there's any others. I think keeping it simple is really good for the community, but knowing the ins and outs of zoning them, how that works, what the regulations are, those kinds of things, and also those liability questions would be really good information for council to have. So yeah, absolutely. I'm more information is more information. I'd love to have that conversation. Is that good with Councillor Deck as well?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Yeah. Yeah. At least for us to consider. Right? It brings up some really good questions. So thank you for that, Councillor Denise. Okay, we did vacation rental. We're going to delve into that more. We are on OCP. That's correct. This way. There it is. Zoning bylaw, done. Vacation, OCP, perfect. And we are. Okay. Is there anything that you, Mr. Brooks, or the CAO would like to add to this before we kind of delve into it?
I have
Nothing from.
Okay, council, OCP. So, there were changes made to the draft. So after the input from us, there will be a final draft that will come to us in September. I'm sure that you have had a look at it. And I know that some of the input that we have put into these other conversations will delve into that OCP. For instance, changing the natural boundary of the zoning bylaw map. So that will be reflected in the OCP map as well. Is that correct, Mr. Brooks?
Yep, from a designation perspective, yes.
Okay, perfect. So, questions or comments on this kind of last-ish draft of OCP? Anybody have anything from council? Councillor Denise.
Been through it quite a few times, and I don't see anything. There's a lot here, but I don't see anything that needs any more changing. But I'm open to conversation if anybody does.
Councillor Deck.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I've read this only once today, but I think it's progressing fine, and I don't see any changes either that need to be made. But I'm open to discussion, but I think a fine job is being done. Thank you.
I think so too. I think this is a really comprehensive and beautiful document. I am so happy to see this OCP. You wouldn't even, for all my years on council, this is like, it's like the bridge for me. It's like, oh, right? That it's finally getting completed. I had a couple of really, really small questions. Hazardous areas 4.12 and 4.21. Are those, can we ask that they do both? So 4.21 says prior to any new development in the Rockfall, they'll consider the BGC report. And then in the policy section for the floodplain and tsunami 4.2.1, it says prior to any, can we add both of those reports to both of those suggestions? I think it's important for everyone in Zeballos to review, if you're developing, to review the floodplain and the rockfall, no matter where you are. You're going to drive through that rockfall. You're going to, you know what I mean? I think those should be, that's a simple one that I thought maybe we might have some interest in doing, just because of being aware that this is a who's who of dangers in the village. What would you say to that?
Through your worship, right now you only have one development permit, which is the Rockfall Hazard Development Permit. If you want to force everybody within the community to consider both rockfall and floodplain, we'll need to establish a new development permit area specifically for floodplain. It will cover the entire village, which means if you do absolutely anything in the village, you're going to trigger someone to have to hire a geotechnical engineer and a flood expert to do anything on their property. So yes, you can certainly do that. It will be administratively burdensome and very costly for anybody within the community.
Okay. So to protect areas, so we can't ask people in as a development permit to look at the flood zone.
You can, we can develop a
But it's
development permit to
restricted.
do, we can do a development permit for specifically for floodplain and that. You already have the Rockfall one.
It's not what I want to do. What I was asking is suggest should consider, like, so that anyone who's developing anything in Zeballos should consider these two documents. Whether that's an internal policy that we make those available to any new developer in community, but not required by a development permit. Do you see what I'm doing? I'd like to make people aware of the multiple dangers, no matter where they're developing, but not add an extra layer of. I just think those two reports are interchangeable, and as a I know they're not required to have a development permit in anywhere besides the Rockfall hazard area, and I'm not asking them to have a development permit. What I'm asking is for people who are developing to consider both reports. Do you see the distinction there?
I think so. I'll have to look at the OCP to understand exactly what you're asking. I don't see the purpose of it at this stage, but I do not have the OCP in front of me right now.
Okay, perfect. And that's just a question. Absolutely. I don't want to add any other development permit burden on this office or anyone else. I just think that the who's who and the what's what before people build here, they should know that we're in a floodplain and in a rockfall hazard. Councillor Jack.
Yes, thank you, Julie. If I understand, you want to give new developers information
Yeah.
on what they could possibly suspect. And
Yeah.
we don't want to open Kevin's big
No.
can of worms with technocrats and drillers and whatever. We just want to give them the information, right?
Yeah, so as a policy within the village, when a person comes and says, hey, I'm thinking about building here, that we refer them to both of those documents, that there's a floodplain document, there's a rockfall document. You have to know we live in a tsunami zone and a high rockfall area in this one section. Have a look at them. Like, that's just an internal office policy. That's not a
Wildfire
No,
development.
focused.
I think that's reasonable. Yeah.
Okay, so just a question, and that's really maybe that's just direction to staff, is like when someone comes in to buy, make sure that they know that we do have these two areas. I think the more that we tell people these things, the less it's a surprise when someone comes into the office and says, what do you mean there's a development permit I need in this area? If every new person who buys a property here knows that we're in a development area, a rockfall hazard area, and it should be obvious. But yeah, we get tsunamis, we get floods, and there's rockfall. There's also power outages and wildfires and all of the things.
Zombies.
They're not zombies yet. Okay, these were other really small questions. There's a lot of policies in here, like 5.13, that's not ours, to foster local training and capacity. There's 531 that are, I would really like if you could work with the CAO and work on the verbiage in here that says advocate to the province for, because there's a lot of these things that we're not going to do, but it makes it sound like the onus is on us to provide these opportunities, but what we're doing is we are advocating to higher levels of government to provide these. I don't know if you want to, the CAO and I had a conversation about it earlier. And maybe if you wanted to talk to him, like, we're not gonna foster local, we're not gonna have local training. We're going to look to the government for training opportunities we can point people in the direction of. Do you understand what I mean? There's a lot of these that we take ownership on that really we don't have the capacity to do. It's something we're not going to do. We're going to look to the province to do them. So I'm wondering if you had any kind of comment on that.
Nothing in particular, Your Worship. So when an OCP is developed, the OCP isn't a document that sets requirements for council. It's a visionary document about when the opportunity arises that gives council a framework to make decisions to take advantage of opportunities.
Okay.
Verbiage is verbiage, says we can change verbiage as necessary, but just understand this document does not handcuff council to have to do things. It doesn't catalyze and require council to do anything in particular. It is a document that provides a framework for future decision making.
So if you can go to 523. Right, so we're going to 5.3.2. Provide adequate land to support housing needs projections. That's
so
not,
that is a legal provision that is required under Bill 44 to have a comment of that nature within your OCP.
okay.
We don't have a
Whether
choice
we
on
have
that
the
one.
land to do that or not.
Correct. We need to make sure that we provide enough land that's zoned for that purpose. And so we actually have to have, yes.
Perfect. That totally answers my question, because I was like, we don't have this.
Yeah, and so it's not the village has to provide the land. It's the overall community has to be zoned enough to provide that land.
Perfect.
And it's one of those legal requirements under the new Bill 44. And in the housing needs report that we've done as in support of this document, we clearly illustrate that under what you have now, we would not have to do anything else from this time forward to provide the actual projected housing requirements under the housing needs report.
Amazing. That's okay, good. Moving on to page 56, 6.4.2. How's your research coming? It says confirm the need for an access road on the east side of Zeballos Inlet. Has anybody found any reason to have that road there?
No, so what we have found to date, and it's not up here anymore. We did have the original map even prior to lot 501 being established that showed a road back there.
Yeah.
That's the only evidence we have found in consideration of that point. I've had poor Chelsea go through the entire 1996 OCP binder that we have, and she has not found any verbiage that talks about that road.
So we've had a lot of conversation about that. Our last meeting, was it the last meeting or possibly the meeting before? I can't remember which, about had that road that went in behind the slough, kind of in behind my place and behind the hotel and that road back there. And seeing that there is no recollection for it. The lots on that side of the slough are not usable for development purposes, that it would require a lot of infrastructure for us to kind of have a road back there and actually put a road in there. How does council feel about taking that completely out of there? I can't see any of you, so you'll have to just interrupt me and say, hey.
Sounds fine to me. Councillor Jack?
Either or, I don't think it really matters. We take it out, leave it in.
Because it's
Doesn't-
not
Your
there
choice.
right. Yeah, it's not
Your
there
choice.
right now, and nobody there. Yeah, so I would say we could take that right out of there. I don't think there's a need for a road back there. None of the lots are usable, and there's no, except for the map in 1952 when we were incorporated, it doesn't exist.
Let's take it out then.
Hey, thank you for that, and thank Chelsea for all of her hard work researching that.
Or some chocolate.
Land use. Okay, policy 9.2.1. And these are just a couple of limiting things, limiting factors.
What page is that?
It is page 62.
Thank you.
Residential development is limited to those areas designated in the residential schedule in area D or in schedule D proposed land use map. I just think that's really limiting. Is this another part for Bill 44 requirement?
No,
I
that
just-
is, this is specifically what a land designation map is for. If you want residential everywhere, you can allow for residential everywhere. But then there's no purpose to have a designation map. So you could just have one big designation saying you can have all the uses everywhere if you wish. Right? So the land use designation maps to establish future land use pattern for the community. And it's like, this is where we want the residential stuff, and that's where we want that stuff, and that's where we want that stuff. So if you want all uses everywhere, then you have one designation and you say, we can have all uses anywhere. What that means, and which is valid, but what that means is in the future, if someone comes forward and makes a request to rezone, any rezoning has to be consistent with the OCP, right? Legally. So if they make a request to rezone and they want to put an industrial park in the middle of your community and you say you can have any use anywhere, you are going to have to consider that for the merits of that rezoning and likely allow that use to occur in the middle of the city or in the community. So that's what a future land use map is, which is what this is. This is what future land use configuration could potentially look like for the village of Zeballos, and therefore you do restrict where those potential uses will go to help begin to direct the community in a particular way.
The reason I came across this and the reason I said that it was limiting is because we're trying to encourage and maximize as many residential uses as possible. And so I do understand the lease use for designation. So like the village core, that's where we want most of our businesses to reside. And I also realize that these are just policies. I just wanted to kind of highlight to us that it may look limiting as we're really trying to push the availability of land for development, for housing stock, for those kinds of things. So I don't know that there's an answer to this, but it just, that was my comment beside it. It just strikes me as limiting. I didn't have it against around any of the other zones. So like the marine designation or the industrial resource in Schedule D. I just wanted to put it out there for conversation and to have those kinds of comments made on it. If the residential was to change in any way, Does that affect the other? Is it something that we should, we could look at, residential, it is, I know it's just a policy, right? I get that. But I'd also like to make it really clear to people and also encourage as much residential property as we can. For instance, I'll give you a perfect for instance. So this is designated, so say we go through with the exercise of putting into institutional zoning in. So this building is is institutional zoned. We want to put a residential unit upstairs for our CAO. What does that do to us, right? So this is why I said it was limiting. So just any other kind of feedback that you have on that. I know it's a policy, but is it limiting ourselves?
Okay, I'm going to start back at the housing needs study that we've completed in the assessment of all land availability. Right now, there is more land available in Zeballos for quadrupling your density. Right? Under your current under this proposed zoning. You could build every house in Zeballos right now, every existing lot in Zeballos right now can have a single family home and a carriage house or a duplex right now, which means you could easily double your density right now. Now, if you assess the available land for residential purposes, we'll just use the mobile home park because we've done some preliminary review on the mobile home park. You could probably put at least another 20 to 25 units on that parcel of land right now. Right? If you look at all of that density, that is more growth than Zeballos will see in the next 50 years. Right? And so there isn't a restriction of residentially availability in Zeballos. The issue in Zeballos isn't the availability for residential through zoning and through land availability. The restriction is the fact of cost of construction in Zeballos is exceedingly high, and to then build something that someone can actually then afford after it's constructed for rental purposes is also exceedingly high. That is going to be the barrier to housing in Zeballos. It's not the availability of land or the availability of zoned land for residential purposes. So, secondly, if you want like accessory dwelling uses in any zone, you just allow for accessory dwelling uses in any zones, right? So like say in the institutional, if we create an institutional zone and you want accessory dwelling, that's an easy tweak to make to that zone and say, here's all your principal uses, schools, blah, 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 blah. But we want accessory dwelling because, the paramedics need a place to stay where they're in town or whatever the purpose is, right? And that's just an easy fix that we can do in that zone specifically.
So I would put that to council. Is that something that we would like to make available? I think, the CAO kind of conversation kind of comes to mind, but also for paramedics, for what if we take the lease back from, a property we already own, and that kind of or what if it lapses and they don't need it anymore? What if, these kinds of things changes? Do we allow these accessory dwellings? Is that something that council would consider, or yes?
Your worship. Where to start? I'm going to make a comment. I've written a lot of zoning bylaws, right? And what I've found is, and when you don't write a lot of zoning bylaws, you try to control everything. My rule is, and this is the rule I give to everyone when I'm working with them, control the 90%. The other 10% you deal with on a case-by-case basis. And so I don't know what that 90% is for Zeballos at this moment, but so just as a rule of thumb, as we go through, even with the OCP, control the 90%, all the big stuff we know is going to happen or we have a high likelihood happening. Let's control that the best we can. And then I'll allow enough flexibility in both the OCP and zoning bylaw to deal with that other 10% that's going to come at us that we just can't predict, right? In this case, for the institutional stuff or for the residential designation in the OCP, I think it addresses the 90%, right? If for some reason there's an institutional use that ends up getting constructed and you need a residential use in it, it is a really quick fix by council to address it.
Okay. Perfect.
None of the things we're putting in place are written in stone. These are living documents that council has the opportunity to amend as needed when they need to.
Okay, perfect, thank you, because that's what I just didn't want to limit ourselves on the space we had to think outside the box and do weird things with, right? Because
Yeah, no,
sometimes the
exactly.
necessity is that.
Yep, exactly.
Always be weird things.
There will always be weird things. And then the very last one that I had was on infrastructure on the table on page 68. And I wanted to take something out of the OCP completely. I take it out of there. And there's two reasons why. One, so it's at the very bottom of the infrastructure and it's study a 2-lane bridge. So there's two reasons I wanted to take it out of there. It's because of the recency of our bridge being put in, and also what they told us for access and egress of that bridge, for accessing it and egressing it at the bottom of Maquinna. And I would hate to promise that or put in a priority action that we're gonna study a 2-lane bridge for a 6-person increase when we just put a brand new bridge in, 6 years, 7 years ago, and they told us this is what you can do with this. This is what the study says. You can put this in, this is your option, and we went with the best we could. I just will put that out there, and I know that a lot of some of these comments come from people commenting from the information that we got back from the feedback that we got back from our public, which was super valuable. But also I just don't think that it's a reality. So I'll ask for comments on that and maybe ask for some feedback from council as well. So to Mr. Brooks.
Oh, I don't have any
Oh.
particular issue. These are implementation options for council to consider. If you guys want to remove them, yeah, 100%.
Is that
Yeah.
something that council would is set on?
I don't, if I could speak,
Please.
you know,
Councillor.
I don't think this is something that we need to worry about having in there or not, but we can take it out if you'd like that, Mayor Colburn. But we could look at doing the study maybe in 2095.
Yeah, and thank you for the comment, Councillor. And again, there, as I said before, these provide you sort of a list of things that you could potentially contemplate to help council make future decisions. These are not things that fetter or tie council to doing anything, right?
No.
Just
No,
to let you, just to reiterate that.
Absolutely.
It's not going to make a difference if it's in there or not.
Yeah. Yeah. If I had my brothers, I would ask that we take it out, but
Sure, take it out. That's fine. If that's important to you, that's fine. Yeah.
Councillor Dack.
Aye. Take it out.
I just remember when we did the study of what options we could do, that we did a feasibility study before we put the bridge in, and the feasibility study said this is the only thing you can do. So I don't know why we would do a study again. That's all.
It would never happen.
Right? Cool. All right. Next is our housing needs. And then would bring us to the end of Mr. Brooks being here. So did you have anything to add to this? Is this kind of a newer piece, or did CAO have anything to add?
I have nothing further.
Perfect. Mr. Brooks.
Yeah, so the housing needs report, this is one of those legislative requirements that came out of, so it's actually been a legislative requirement for a long time. But with Bill 44, they changed the requirements and updated the requirements. So we did the original housing needs a while back, April-ish of this year. And then in July of this year, they actually established a new updated methodology for housing needs statistical calculations. What we've done is because we actually the new statistical calculation methodology we're required to use doesn't work well for smaller communities. So what we've done is we've met the legislative requirements of using the new statistical methodology, but we've also then integrated in the original statistical analysis that we did because we just think it actually works better for providing useful information to Zeballos. That is the information that was used to draft the OCP housing section. So you can read the housing needs report, that's fine. What is the implications and implementation of that is the housing section within the efficient community plan.
So he's saying if you didn't read it, you don't have to.
And also, this is one of those sections that we are legislatively required to have. So we are
Right.
required to have the housing needs report. We're required to calculate those stats in a particular way, even though we think they're not very good statistics. But then we're required also then to use those statistics and our best available information to identify those housing needs pieces and those projections of the number of houses that are needed for the future.
Perfect. So through to the, to council, through to Rondek.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Okay, so we've got it. It's good enough. Let's pass it. Let's move on.
I can agree with that.
And this is one of those pieces where I can too. I've gone through it. I hate the stats. They don't make sense to me. They're ridiculous. But also I know that we're using them for a purpose to fulfill the needs of a certain requirement. I know that it complements our past housing needs study and is just an add-on that we did because our last housing needs study was done on the same year as the census, I believe, or right within 1 year of the census, and then a new census came out, and so I have gone through this as well. I don't have any questions that are not, why is this stats relevant to us? Comment. So I'm
Yes, I agree.
I have great work and appreciate it and realize the work that went into producing this, but like, no comment.
Yeah. And this is one of those oddities of Bill 44 and that these new housing needs reports are going to have to be done every 5 years with the same statistical methodology. And a future recommendation for the village is that when you do it, meet the legislative requirements, but ask the people that are going to be doing your updates and that to do a little bit deeper dive into the reality of the vacancies and things like that in Zeballos, because the statistical methodology that they put forward does not work for small communities.
It does not. So thank you for that. And maybe if we can kind of highlight that when we do our updates. I think that anecdotal information is much more informative here than the stats that they require. Councillor Janice.
Yeah, thank you. You know, both of these are very, very big, complicated documents for us. And thanks for being patient with us, Mr. Brooks. Appreciate it a lot.
No problem at all.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. I will echo that for sure. The undertaking and the care with which you have treated the residents and our and our council and staff is really appreciated. Councillor Deck.
Yes, through the mayor. Thank you, Mr. Kevin Brooks. As far as I'm concerned, now you're verified. Well done.
Perfect. Yeah, appreciate all the hard work. I look forward to seeing it in a final kind of document, and then that will come to us September 24th at our next regular meeting. And yay, McElhaney, yay, CAO, yay, council, yay, people in the village for participating and coming out and doing that engagement with us. So important. Alrighty, folks. That brings us to, we've got no delegations, no correspondence, no, nothing. We have an 11. We have an in-camera. So if somebody could pass that
Yeah, I'll
Um,
do that. Move committee to go in camera under Community Charter Section 91A, personal information about an identifiable individual who holds or is being considered for a position as an officer, employee, or agent of the municipality or another position appointed by the municipality.
Second that?
Perfect, all in favor? Any
Aye.
opposed, carried? And have a lovely evening, Mr. Brooks. Appreciate you
Thank
sticking
you.
around.
Thank you.
There's all.
Move to adjourn.
Public question. I don't think there's anything we'll have to rise and report on, so yeah, absolutely. Is that second?
Second.
Perfect, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Carried, we are out.